4 hours. That's all it took to reshape the entire future of artificial intelligence in America. At 9 a.m., the federal government slaps Anthropic with a designation normally reserved for Chinese intelligence operations. By 1 p.m., OpenAI executives are shaking hands with Pentagon officials, ink still wet on a contract worth billions. And then, hours after the government blacklists one of the most advanced AI systems ever built, the military uses that exact same system to coordinate strikes on Iranian targets. Read that again, they banned it, then they used it. The same day. This isn't bureaucratic confusion. This isn't paperwork moving slowly through government channels. The timing is surgical, the execution is flawless, and the implications should terrify you. Because what you're watching isn't a policy disagreement between tech companies, it's not a contract dispute. This is the blueprint for how you eliminate your competition by weaponizing the most powerful office on Earth. The loopholes they are exploiting right now don't just threaten one company. They threaten every American who's ever sent an email, made a phone call, or typed a search query, and almost nobody's paying attention. But here's where this story gets strange. Both companies publicly champion the same principles: responsible AI development, human oversight, safety-first approaches. Their published guidelines read like carbon copies of each other. Yet one sits in the Oval Office, celebrated as America's technological future. The other faces congressional hearings, regulatory threats, and whisper campaigns painting them as dangerous. Same values on paper, radically different treatment in practice. So what actually separates them? It's not their mission statements, it's not their safety protocols, it's not even their technology. It's a single decision made behind closed doors, a handshake that never happened, a meeting that went wrong. Because in Washington, your stated principles mean nothing. What matters is whether you play the game, whether you write the checks, whether you bend when powerful people apply pressure. One company understood this immediately. They saw the opportunity and seized it. The other believed their work should speak for itself, that merit and innovation would be enough. They were catastrophically wrong. And the weapon used against them, it wasn't a competitor, it wasn't the market, it was the President of the United States. The stakes here go far beyond corporate rivalry. What's being decided right now in classified Pentagon meetings and through selective executive access will shape the next century of American life. We're talking about artificial intelligence systems that will eventually screen your job applications, flag your social media posts, analyze your medical records, and predict your behavior before you even act. The question isn't whether this technology gets built, it's already being built. The question is, who controls it? Who sets the limits? Who's accountable when it goes wrong? If these systems get deployed through backroom deals, through contracts awarded based on political donations and personal relationships rather than oversight and competition, then there's no mechanism for accountability, no congressional review that matters, no public debate. The legal precedents being set in these Pentagon boardrooms will determine whether AI serves democratic institutions or whether it becomes a tool that operates outside them entirely. Every American will interact with these systems, most will never know it, and the framework governing all of it is being written right now by people who believe transparency is a vulnerability they can't afford. What happened to Anthropic isn't random, it's not politics, it's not even personal, it's a playbook. One that's been refined across a century and a half of American corporate warfare. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. 3 strategies, 3 historical precedents, all running simultaneously in the AI industry right now. First, the standard oil play: write the regulations yourself, then watch your competitors choke on compliance costs you helped design. Rockefeller perfected this in the 1880s. Second, the Nixon play: weaponize federal agencies against your enemies, IRS audits, FBI investigations, regulatory harassment, make the government your attack dog. Third, the AT&T play: become so embedded in military and intelligence infrastructure that breaking you up becomes a national security threat. Too classified to fail, the genius of what's happening now? Someone figured out how to run all 3 plays at once, craft regulations that favor your architecture, position rivals as security threats, embed yourself so deeply into defense contracts that your survival becomes synonymous with American dominance. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is corporate strategy operating exactly as designed. And the targets never see it coming until it's too late. 1872, Cleveland, Ohio. John D. Rockefeller sits in a mahogany office drafting letters to state legislators. He's not fighting regulation. He's writing it. Standard Oil publicly champions new safety standards for kerosene refineries, fire codes, quality inspections, licensing requirements, noble causes, every single one. But here's what the newspapers don't report. Rockefeller's lawyers designed these rules with surgical precision. The compliance costs are astronomical, unless you already own the infrastructure, unless you've already achieved scale, unless you're Standard Oil. Within 5 years, Cleveland's independent refiners dropped from 30 to 6. Not because Rockefeller outcompeted them, because they couldn't afford the inspectors, the paperwork, the mandatory equipment upgrades that Rockefeller's facilities already possessed. The smaller operators didn't even understand what was happening. They supported these regulations. They thought government was protecting them from the big guy. This is the playbook. Capture the referee, design rules that look neutral, but detonate on contact with anyone below a certain size. Let the state do your dirty work while you pose as a champion of fair play. And a century later, someone in Silicon Valley was taking notes. The genius isn't opposition, it's embrace. When Standard Oil faced regulation, they fought it, lost everything. OpenAI learned that lesson. They don't resist government oversight. They welcome it, publicly, enthusiastically. But watch the language. Every framework they accept contains the same 3 words. All lawful purposes. Sounds reasonable, sounds responsible, until you understand what lawful purposes actually means under Executive Order 1-3, under existing surveillance law, under national security exceptions that have never been tested in court. Those 3 words aren't a limitation, they're a trap door. OpenAI positions itself as the responsible actor, the company that cooperates, the partner that understands national security needs. Meanwhile, Anthropic demands oversight with actual enforcement mechanisms, binding restrictions, real accountability. One company gets classified briefings and government contracts, the other gets labelled a security risk. This is regulatory capture perfected. You don't fight the regulations, you write them. You accept frameworks that sound restrictive but contain deliberate blind spots. Loopholes wide enough to drive an autonomous weapons program through. The public sees safety theatre. The intelligence community sees a willing partner. The contracts told the real story. Both companies stood before the government with nearly identical ethical statements. Both claimed commitment to privacy. Both promised responsible AI deployment. But Anthropic's negotiators pushed for something unprecedented. Explicit contractual prohibitions written directly into the agreement. No warrantless surveillance of American citizens. No mass data collection programs. Specific red lines that would be legally binding and publicly enforceable. OpenAI took a different approach. They accepted what the government offered. Compliance with existing legal frameworks. That phrase sounds reasonable until you understand what it actually means. Existing legal frameworks include classified interpretations of surveillance law that most Americans have never seen. Secret court rulings that expanded government authority far beyond what the public text suggests. Loopholes carved out over decades that permit exactly the activities Anthropic tried to explicitly prohibit. One company wanted ethics enforced through contract law, measurable, specific, actionable. The other accepted ethics filtered through intelligence community definitions, flexible, classified, unaccountable. The difference wasn't about values. Both companies could claim clean hands. The difference was enforceability, and that distinction would determine everything that came next. Nixon kept a list. 200 names, journalists, activists, anyone who threatened his grip on power. And here's what made it devastating. He never broke the law. The IRS audited his critics for routine compliance reviews. The FBI opened investigations citing national security concerns. The FCC questioned broadcast licenses through standard regulatory procedures. Every form was filed correctly. Every process followed protocol, every action had legal justification, but everyone knew what was really happening. When you control the machinery of government, you don't need to break rules, you just need to choose who those rules apply to. The tax code is thousands of pages long. Find anyone's violation if you look hard enough. National security is whatever you define it to be. Broadcast standards are inherently subjective. The weapons aren't illegal. The targeting is political. It took the Watergate Committee to finally name this truth. Lawful authority becomes authoritarian the moment it's selectively deployed. The same hammer that builds houses can crush skulls. The difference isn't the tool, it's who decides where it swings. The designation they used against Anthropic wasn't random. Supply chain risk. That phrase carries weight. It's the same classification America deployed against Huawei, against ZTE. Companies suspected of funneling data directly to the Chinese Communist Party. Now they're applying it to an American company, founded by Americans, operating on American soil. Here's what makes this surgical. OpenAI's models can do everything Anthropic's can. Same capabilities, same theoretical risks, same potential for misuse by foreign actors. But OpenAI didn't get the designation. The difference isn't technical, it's political. Anthropic pushed back. They demanded guardrails. They insisted on safety protocols that would slow deployment. They questioned whether certain applications should exist at all. OpenAI said yes. Anthropic said wait. And wait became a national security threat. Every AI company watching this understood the message instantly. Compliance isn't about protecting America. It's about protecting access. Question the administration's timeline and you're not a cautious scientist. You're Huawei. You're a threat to be neutralized. The philosopher Carl Schmitt understood power better than any tech executive ever will. Sovereign is he who decides on the exception, not who follows the rules, who breaks them, who draws the line between friend and enemy. National security isn't a technical assessment. There's no algorithm calculating threat levels. It's a political decision made by political actors for political reasons. The same artificial intelligence capabilities that make one company America's technological salvation make another an existential threat. The difference isn't in the code, it's in the relationship. Ask the wrong questions about surveillance, and suddenly your servers threaten democracy. Build the same technology while staying quiet, and you're a patriot. The classification itself reveals the game. When national security can be deployed against domestic companies at will, it stops being a shield and becomes a sword. This is the moment the mask slips. The moment we see that the entire framework, the reviews, the assessments, the official determinations, all of it bends to serve predetermined conclusions. The enemy isn't identified through investigation. The investigation is launched because the enemy was already chosen. The year is near 13. Theodore Vail, president of AT&T, makes a calculated surrender that would guarantee his company's dominance for the next 70 years. He agrees to government regulation. It sounds like defeat. It was genius. By positioning AT&T as a natural monopoly, serving the public good, Vail eliminated the threat of antitrust prosecution entirely. The government didn't just tolerate AT&T's control of every telephone line in America. It actively crushed competitors on AT&T's behalf. But here is what made AT&T truly untouchable. During World War I, then World War II, then the Cold War, AT&T's infrastructure became inseparable from American military operations. The company built the DW Line radar system. It manufactured nuclear weapon components. Its long-distance network carried classified government communications. And when the NSA needed to monitor global communications, AT&T was already there, cables in hand. The company wasn't just a utility, it was a shadow arm of the intelligence state. Try breaking that up. For 7 decades, every administration, Democrat or Republican, protected AT&T like a national security asset, because that's exactly what it had become. The lesson was clear: become indispensable to power, and power will protect you. The pattern is already visible if you know where to look. OpenAI's board welcomed Paul Nakasone, the former NSA director who oversaw some of the largest surveillance operations in American history, not as a consultant, as a board member, shaping company direction from the inside. The Pentagon deal followed months later. ChatGPT integrated into classified military operations, defense contracts worth billions flowing into company coffers, and with those contracts came dependency, the kind that makes a company untouchable. Watch the revolving door spin. Generals retire on Friday, join AI company boards on Monday. Intelligence officials who once regulated these systems now collect stock options from them. The relationships compound, the loyalties blur. This is the military-industrial AI complex forming in real time. And here's the strategic genius. Companies that integrate deepest with surveillance infrastructure become too essential to national security to regulate. They are protected, immune, but companies that resist, that advocate for privacy, that refuse government backdoors, They get labelled uncooperative, unreliable, security risks. The market doesn't just reward compliance with the surveillance state, it punishes independence. The winners aren't chosen by consumers, they are chosen by clearance levels. 1961. Dwight Eisenhower, the general who commanded D-Day, the president who kept America out of war for 8 years, stands before cameras for his final address. His warning shocks the nation. We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. He'd watched it form with his own eyes. Defense contractors funding congressional campaigns, Pentagon officials retiring into cushy corporate boardrooms, congressional committees approving weapon systems their districts manufactured. A perfect triangle where everyone profits, and the machinery of war becomes self-perpetuating. 65 years later, that same geometry is emerging around artificial intelligence. But there's a critical difference. The military-industrial complex took decades to calcify. The AI industrial complex is forming in years. The weapons it produces don't sit in silos. They integrate into every system, every decision, every aspect of governance and commerce simultaneously. Eisenhower worried about tanks and missiles. We're watching the same pattern accelerate around technology that will reshape the very nature of power itself. The triangle isn't just forming, it's already rotating. The genius isn't in what they do to Anthropic, it's in what every other AI company does to themselves afterward. French philosopher Michel Foucault studied an 18th century prison design called the Panopticon, a central tower surrounded by cells. Guards could watch any prisoner at any time, but prisoners could never tell when they were being observed. The result? Inmates began policing their own behaviour constantly, assuming eyes were always on them. This is the blueprint. Blacklist one company for demanding explicit boundaries. Punish them publicly for wanting safeguards written down. Make an example of the firm that asked too many questions. Now watch what happens across Silicon Valley. Every general counsel reviews their government contracts differently. Every CEO thinks twice before requesting prohibited use clauses. Every board quietly shelves proposals for ethical red lines. Not because anyone told them to, because they've learned what happens to companies that ask for clarity. The message propagates silently through investor calls, through industry conferences, through whispered conversations at private dinners. One punishment: universal compliance, no further threats required. Foucault called this disciplinary power. We should call it what it is: efficient. OpenAI's strategy here is genuinely elegant, in the most Machiavellian sense possible. They've accepted the same stated principles as Anthropic: safety, responsibility, careful deployment. The rhetoric is nearly identical, but the legal framework underneath, dramatically weaker. And here's where the game theory gets interesting. If those surveillance loopholes are never exploited, OpenAI looks principled. They look cooperative. They look like good corporate citizens who trusted the government and were rewarded for that trust. But if those loopholes are exploited, if user data flows to intelligence agencies, if the privacy concerns materialize, OpenAI simply claims they relied on government assurances. They point to existing law. They say they followed the rules as written. Plausible deniability isn't an accident here. It's built into the contract structure itself. Heads, I win. Tails, you lose. Anthropic, meanwhile, demanded explicit protections, which means if anything goes wrong, they can't claim ignorance. They showed they knew the risks. Their caution becomes evidence against them. The company that asks more questions bears more responsibility. The company that asked fewer questions has more exits. Machiavelli would be genuinely impressed. Hours after Anthropic is officially designated a supply chain risk, after they're banned from government contracts as the supposed threat to national security, something remarkable happens. Claude is deployed to help plan military strikes on Iran. Let that sink in. The same artificial intelligence that's apparently too dangerous to write government reports is suddenly critical enough to help coordinate active military operations. The same technology that poses an unacceptable risk to federal procurement is trusted with actual wartime planning. This isn't just hypocrisy. This is the confession. Because if Claude were genuinely a security threat, you don't use it to plan attacks on foreign nations, you don't feed it sensitive military intelligence. You don't trust it with operational details that could cost American lives. But they did, because they knew what they knew. Everyone involved knew the designation was theatre. The ban was never about protecting national security. It was about punishing a company that wouldn't play ball. It was about sending a message to every other tech founder watching. And most importantly, it was about clearing the competitive landscape for someone who learned that loyalty matters more than safety. The exodus begins within hours. Subscription cancellations spike 400%. The hashtag #DeleteChatGPT trends for 3 consecutive days. Tech workers who built their careers on OpenAI's tools post resignation letters on LinkedIn, calling the deal a betrayal of everything the company claimed to represent. Then the leaks start. Internal Slack messages surface showing engineers raised red flags months earlier. They warned leadership about the optics, about the ethics, about the precedent. Those warnings were acknowledged, filed away, and ultimately ignored. The board had calculated the backlash. They just calculated wrong. Within 72 hours, OpenAI releases a carefully worded statement announcing they're renegotiating certain terms of the agreement. They frame it as listening to community feedback. But everyone understands what it actually means. The original deal was never meant to survive public scrutiny. It was designed to be signed quietly, implemented gradually, and normalized before anyone could organize resistance. They almost pulled it off. Now the real question emerges, the one that should terrify every stakeholder in artificial intelligence. If this is what they attempted in broad daylight, what negotiations are happening right now that we'll never hear about? In 1971, Nobel laureate George Stigler published a paper that changed how economists understand power. His theory of regulatory capture argued that industries don't fight regulation. They acquire it, they design it, they operate it for their own benefit. But what we're witnessing now is something Stigler never anticipated. Call it regulatory capture 2.0. The old playbook was simple. Lobby against rules that hurt you. Lobby for rules that hurt competitors. Crude, obvious, traceable. The new playbook is elegant. You don't oppose safety regulations. You champion them publicly while negotiating versions riddled with escape hatches. Voluntary commitments instead of legal mandates. Self-reporting instead of independent audits. Frameworks so vague they're essentially decorative. Meanwhile, your competitor demands the version and with actual teeth. Real enforcement, genuine accountability. And for that sin, they become the target. This is compliance theatre elevated to an art form. The appearance of oversight satisfies the public. The reality of capture satisfies the bottom line. And the competitor who refused to play along? They are not just outmaneuvered, they're eliminated using the very principles they believed in. The precedents being written today will outlive every executive who signs them. Executive Order 133, drafted in 1981, contains a loophole that intelligence agencies have exploited for decades. If data on American citizens is collected overseas, constitutional protections evaporate. And here's what makes AI different from every surveillance technology before it. These systems process data globally by design. Your information doesn't respect borders, and neither will the tools analyzing it. The lawful purposes language OpenAI accepted sounds reasonable, until you realize who defines lawful. Every administration reinterprets that phrase to match its priorities. The explicit prohibitions Anthropic wrote into their principles, the ones that cost them the contract, those were the guardrails that couldn't be quietly reinterpreted. Infrastructure outlasts intentions. The systems being constructed right now, the databases, the integration protocols, the access permissions, all of it will be inherited by administrations we cannot predict, led by officials we haven't yet imagined, targeting populations that feel safe today. This isn't about one contract or one company. It's about what kind of AI governance becomes the default for the next 50 years. The foundation is being poured while most Americans aren't watching. You just learned 3 frameworks that 99% of people will never see. Regulatory capture. When you see a company championing regulations, ask who can't afford to comply. Sovereign exception. When national security gets deployed against a domestic company, follow the contracts signed within 48 hours. The panopticon effect. When one player gets punished, watch who self-censors without being asked. These aren't conspiracy theories, they're pattern recognition. And now that you see it, you'll see it everywhere. In tech, in finance, in every industry where government picks winners. The question isn't whether the game is rigged. You now know it is. The question is what you do with that knowledge.